The stone chimney rose 14 feet above Ingrid Halverson's cabin roof along Stillwater Creek, no different from any other settler's stack in the Montana Territory. Smoke curled into the pale November sky, thin and steady, a familiar sight in a valley where winter decided who stayed and who vanished. But beneath that cabin, something else was rising that made men stop their wagons and stare in silence. 6 feet into frozen ground, Ingrid Halverson was digging straight down where her late husband's floor had once been. While smoke climbed upward like it always had, she was building something underground, something no one along the creek had ever seen. Old men shook their heads. Younger men laughed outright. Lars Halverson had been buried in August, 3 months after a cottonwood log crushed his chest during a barn raising. The valley had said kind words, brought food for a week, then quietly waited for Ingrid to do what widows were expected to do. She was 41, had no children, and by the unspoken rules of the frontier, she was supposed to remarry fast or sell the claim and leave. Instead, she hired 2 Crow laborers and told them to dig. By the first week of December, when the temperature dropped to 8 below zero, the hole beneath her cabin measured 12 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 7 feet deep. Wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of dirt came out, steam rising from the earth as it met the cold air. Ingrid worked beside the men, her hands cracked and red, mixing clay mortar herself and lining the pit with riverstone. "That Swedish woman's lost her mind," Martin Keller said to anyone who would listen. Keller had settled his land 7 years earlier and survived winters that had driven families away or put them in the ground. He had built 3 cabins in his life, each one better than the last. And he knew one thing for certain. You did not waste labor digging holes when winter was already knocking. "She'll freeze playing in the mud while her wood pile runs out," he said. "Come February, she'll be burning furniture." Ingrid was not playing. She was rebuilding a heating system her grandfather had used in a farmhouse outside Sweden, a system that did not let heat rush up a chimney and vanish into the sky. It stored warmth in stone and earth, holding it long after the fire died down. What made people laugh was not just the digging. It was what she did to the chimney itself. The main flue still rose through the roof, carrying smoke away like it always had. But 4 feet above the firebox, Ingrid split it. A second channel curved downward through the cabin floor and into the stone chamber below. That underground passage wound through the rock in careful turns, forcing hot gases to give up their heat before rejoining the main chimney and escaping outside. To the settlers of Stillwater Creek, it looked like madness. Thomas Rearin rode over from his place 3 miles north the day Ingrid mortared the last stones. Rearin had been a Union Army sergeant and spent winters at Fort Laramie. He was not a cruel man, but he had little patience for foolish risks. He dismounted, peered through the gaps where floorboards had been lifted, and spoke plainly. "Ma'am, you're burning wood to heat the ground. You've got maybe 5 cords split. Come March, we'll find you frozen." Ingrid looked up at him, clay on her hands, her face calm. "By February, Mr. Rearin, I'll be burning half the wood you are," she said, "and sleeping warmer than you have since you left back east."
He snorted.
"Heat rises," he said. "Always has." "Heat radiates," she replied. "Stone holds it." Rearin shook his head as he mounted his horse. "I'll check on you in January," he called as he rode away. "If you're alive, I'll bring you a cord of wood." By mid-December, the floorboards were back in place. Beneath them, tons of stone slowly soaked up heat each evening, releasing it through the long nights. For the first time since she'd settled the claim, Ingrid woke without frost lining the walls. She let the fire burn down to coals after midnight and still rose to a cabin that felt alive. Sarah Brennan stopped by a few days before Christmas. She lived closest, had 3 children, and knew better than most how thin the line between survival and loss could be. "It feels warm," Sarah admitted, standing over the hidden stone chamber. "But what happens when the wood runs low?" "The stones hold once they're charged," Ingrid said. "I burn hot fires twice a day instead of small ones all day, and if you're wrong," Ingrid met her eyes. Then you'll know I died proving nothing." Sarah did not laugh. She felt the warmth under her boots, steady and deep, and left without arguing. 2 days later, the storm came down from Canada like something sent to judge the land. Temperatures fell to 23 below in a single afternoon. Wind drove snow sideways, erasing the valley and sealing families into their cabins. Men fed stoves through the night and still woke to ice in their water buckets. Children coughed. Fingers went numb hauling wood. Ingrid Halverson slept. Her evening fire had burned hot, the stones beneath her floor glowing with stored heat. At dawn, while the wind screamed outside and the world disappeared in white, her cabin still held warmth. At first light, someone began pounding on her door. Ingrid opened the door to find Sarah Brennan standing in the blowing snow, her face raw, her breath coming fast. She did not waste words. "It's William," Sarah said. "He can't breathe right." Ingrid did not ask questions. She grabbed Lars's old coat, wrapped herself tight, and stepped into the storm. The wind tried to shove them sideways as they crossed the yard toward the Brennan cabin. Snow stung like grit, and the cold cut through wool as if it were thin cloth. Inside the Brennan cabin, the air felt sharp and dead. The stove glowed red, but the heat clung close to it and never reached the corners. Little William lay on the bed wrapped in quilts, his breathing shallow, his lips showing a faint blue color that no mother ever forgets. Ingrid knelt beside him, pressed her hand to his chest, and made a decision in seconds.
"Bundle him,"
she said.
"Bring all the children."
Now. Daniel Brennan hesitated. The storm was still raging, and moving a sick child in this cold went against every instinct, but Sarah was already obeying. Fear has a way of clearing doubt. Ingrid lifted William herself, holding him tight against her chest, and led the way back through the white roar. The distance felt longer this time. Every step mattered. When they reached Ingrid's cabin and pushed inside, the difference was immediate. The warmth wrapped around them like a living thing. Not the sharp blast of stove heat, but something deeper, rising from the floor, from the walls, from everywhere at once. Daniel stood still, stunned. "My God," he whispered. Ingrid laid William on her bed, which sat directly above the hottest part of the stone chamber. She stripped off his damp layers, wrapped him in dry blankets, and let the warmth do its quiet work. Within minutes, his breathing slowed. The tightness in his chest eased. Color crept back into his face. Sarah sank to her knees and pressed her hand to the floorboards. "They're warm," she said softly. "They stay warm," Ingrid replied. "That's the point." The storm did not stop. It howled through the night and into the next day. Word traveled anyway, carried by men who risked frostbite to check on neighbors. By the second evening, more people were knocking at Ingrid's door. Thomas Rearan arrived first, snow packed into his beard, his pride packed away with it. He stood inside the cabin, silent, feeling the warmth rise through his boots. "You were right," he said finally. Not long after, Martin Keller came with his wife and sons. They had burned through half a cord of wood in one night and still shivered. Keller sat down hard on the floor, pressed his palm to the boards, and stared at nothing. "It's like a bathhouse," he muttered, heat coming up instead of running away. By the third day, 13 people crowded into Ingrid's small cabin. They slept on the floor, on benches, anywhere there was space. The temperature never dropped below the high 50s. Her woodpile shrank slowly, while others vanished fast. No one laughed anymore. They asked questions instead. How deep was the chamber? What kind of stone worked best? How the smoke still pulled upward without backing into the room? Ingrid answered everything. She lifted floorboards and showed the clay-lined channels. She explained how the earth insulated the heat, how stone gave it back slowly, how burning hot and fast was better than weak fires that never warmed anything properly.
"This isn't new," she told them.
"It's old, older than this land being called anything at all." When the storm finally broke after 3 days, families returned to their cabins changed. They had felt something different, something better. Martin Keller came back a week later with a notebook and a shovel. Thomas Rearan brought measurements and paper. Daniel Brennan brought his sons and offered labor. By March, 4 other cabins along Stillwater Creek were digging. The next winter told the story better than any argument. Those with stone beneath their floors burned less wood and slept through the night. Children stayed healthy, hands stayed whole. Those without came asking, what had started as laughter had turned into imitation. Ingrid Halverson never said, "I told you so." She did not need to. The stones did that for her. And as word spread beyond the creek, something quiet but powerful took root. Knowledge that had crossed oceans was anchoring itself into Montana soil, one cabin at a time. The neighbors who had mocked her now watched their own chimneys and wondered how much heat they were throwing away. And they wondered how many winters they had suffered that did not need to be so hard. The valley would never look at warmth the same way again.
Wait, before we move on, what do you think about this story so far?
Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The winter of 1877 did not forgive mistakes. It waited for them. January came in hard and stayed. Snow stacked higher than fence rails. Creek ice thickened until axes rang dull against it. Cabins without stone beneath their floors burned wood like men burning hope. Nights were the worst. Fires died low. Cold crept back in. People woke shaking and afraid to sleep again. But in 5 cabins along Stillwater Creek, the nights were different. Ingrid Halverson's place stayed warm even when the fire went dark. The stones beneath her floor released their heat slowly, steady as a heartbeat. She slept through nights that once meant waking every 2 hours to feed a stove. She woke rested, not stiff, not afraid. Others noticed. Martin Keller finished his system by mid-January. The first night he trusted it, he sat awake, waiting for the cold to fail him. It never did. By morning, his cabin was still warm, and his woodpile barely touched. He stood in his doorway at dawn, breath fogging, and laughed once, not mocking. Relieved. Thomas Rearin took longer. He measured and recalculated, rebuilt his flue twice, then tore it out and did it again. When he finally trusted his numbers and let the fire die overnight, he woke to warmth and silence. No wind whistling through cracks, no ice in the water bucket. He rode straight to Ingrid's place that morning and tipped his hat. "You didn't fight nature," he said. "You understood it." By February, the difference between the cabins was clear. Children in stone-heated homes stayed healthy. In others, coughs lingered and fingers cracked. People talked less about surviving winter and more about enduring it. When another storm rolled through late that month, it took lives in nearby valleys. Along Stillwater Creek, no one died. Spring came slow, but it came. Snow melted. Creek ice broke. The land breathed again. That summer, digging replaced planting for some families. They dug not because they feared winter now, but because they respected it. Ingrid helped when asked. She measured, advised, lifted stones with hands still scarred from her own work. She never charged for knowledge. "This isn't mine," she said. "It's just remembered." By the next winter, more than half the settlement had stone beneath their floors. Woodpiles lasted longer. Nights were quieter. The valley felt settled in a way it never had before. Ingrid lived in that cabin for 14 more years. She aged there, alone but never lonely. People came to her for advice, for warmth, for quiet understanding. When she finally sold the place and left, the stone stayed. Years passed. Technology changed. People forgot why the floors stayed warm longer than they should. But the stones did not forget. They waited. Long after laughter faded, long after names blurred, long after frontier hardship turned into history, 4 tons of granite still rested beneath those boards, holding the proof that sometimes the old ways work, that sometimes wisdom comes from remembering instead of inventing, and that one woman, digging beneath her cabin while neighbors laughed, changed how a valley survived winter forever.